Jayom Vishnupad Paramahansa Paribrajakacharya Astotarasata Shishimad A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinatha Shama Kunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Jagannath Puri Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Samaveda Bhaktavrinda Ki Jai. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Today we're reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, written by His Holiness Satsvarup Das Goswami. We'll be completing the 9th chapter today. 9th chapter is A Resident of Vrindavan. Last week we heard that Srila Prabhupada had finally made the decision that it was time for him to take sannyas. If he wanted to accomplish his mission that had been given to him by his spiritual master, he had to become a sannyasi, which meant to others that he had fully dedicated himself to preaching Krishna consciousness. Already internally he was fully dedicated, but on account of social etiquette and acceptance externally, sannyas was required, just as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu also took sannyas in order to preach. So first Prabhupada approached the head of the Chaitanya Mat, who was Tirtha Maharaj, and Tirtha Maharaj insisted that he first join the Gaudiya Mat, the Chaitanya Mat, become a member, and in due course of time they would see whether they would award him sannyas, whether they would print his books after printing many other important shastras, and possibly sending him to the Western countries. But everything was delayed and postponed if we were to take shelter under Tirtha Maharaj. Abai next turned to Keshav Maharaj in Mathura, and Keshav Maharaj told Abai to take sannyas immediately. After corresponding with Tirtha Maharaj, Abai had felt some uncertainty about accepting sannyas, and now that he was being encouraged so strongly, he resisted. But Keshav Maharaj was insistent. Now, Keshav Maharaj at the time was in Mayapur when Srila Prabhupada went to, because we know he was staying here at the Bansi Gopal temple, but he had very close relations with the devotees who were serving there at the Keshav Gaudiya Mat in Mathura. So, not only from here did he have relations, but they stayed with Prabhupada at his home. He gave them 4 rooms above his laboratory. They stayed there at Sita Banerjee Lane. And even when he was in Prayag, they would come to visit Srila Prabhupada. So this was a very long-standing friendship and relationship that the devotees had together, God brothers. Keshav Maharaj, Sridhar Maharaj, Srila Prabhupada, Jaya Bara Swami. There were other sannyasis also who took part in, because the Chaitanya Mat now being separated from some of these sannyasis, Keshav Maharaj, along with Srila Prabhupada, they established the Gaudiya Vedanta Samiti. So Keshav Maharaj had a mat in Mayapur, and he left the mat in Mathura under the care of his disciple, Narayan Maharaj, Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj had taken sannyas in 1947. So he got initiated in 1947, and he took sannyas in 1952. So he was very, very encouraging to Srila Prabhupada that you must take sannyas. And he wrote to Keshav Maharaj in Mayapur that because they all had the highest respect for Srila Prabhupada, Keshav Maharaj told his disciples that Prabhupada was a genius and he would be able to carry out this mission. So all of Keshav Maharaj's disciples had such high respect for Prabhupada, although he was still in Grihastha Vesh. So when Keshav Maharaj came back to Mathura, he and Abhay Babu, that's Srila Prabhupada, they discussed the matter together. And Keshav Maharaj was encouraging him like anything, that now is the time for you to take sannyas if you want to carry out your mission. And Prabhupada was very honestly speaking to him that I don't know if I have the strength to do this all alone. And Keshav Maharaj preached to him that whatever strength you have, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu will give you that strength and give you the inspiration to carry out his mission. You simply have to take that step of accepting sannyas. So along with Prabhupada, there was another godbrother of theirs who he had known since the very beginning of his association with the Gaudiya Math. His name was Sanatan Das. He was much older than Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada was 50, it was in 1959, so 59 plus 4, he was 63 at the time. Sanatan Das was already in his 90s, and he hadn't taken sannyas yet. And Prabhupada was very close with their family. In fact, when his daughter, Sanatan's daughter, had their first baby, son, because Prabhupada was so much respected amongst his godbrothers, they asked him to do the Annaprashan. So he would go to their house and he treated Sanatan's family, children just like his own children. Very loving family relationships amongst the godbrothers and their families growing up together. So Sanatan told him, if you take sannyas, then I'll also take sannyas. So they agreed together to take the sannyas ashram from their godbrother, Keshav Maharaj. Srila Prabhupada. I was sitting alone in Vrindavan writing. My godbrother insisted to me, Bhaktivedanta Prabhu, you must do it. Without accepting the renounced order of life, nobody can become a preacher. So he insisted. Not he insisted, practically, my spiritual master insisted. He wanted me to become a preacher. So he forced me through this godbrother. You accept. So unwillingly, I accepted. Now this unwillingly comes from Prabhupada's deep sense of humility. He had left his family, and Keshav Maharaj used to preach to him that you're going here and there all alone, trying to maintain your family. They're not even favorable. Why don't you join us? Take up this preaching work full time. But Prabhupada, due to his sense of duty and responsibility, it took him up until the last possible, always he was trying to make his family Krishna conscious. And it was when it became completely impossible, and he saw that his wife and his children had no interest in what he was doing. They mentioned that his sons used to wear pants. Prabhupada would wear a dhoti and his sons would wear pants. They would be upstairs while he would have his programs downstairs of giving lectures. They just weren't interested. So then Prabhupada finally, he realized, yes, this is the step I have to take. And he was still staying at the Bansi Gopal temple at that time. He had not yet moved to Radha Damodar. Keshavji Gaudiya Math was located in the midst of one of Mathura's downtown bazaars. Its main entrance, an arched doorway, led into a courtyard, open to the sky through a metal grating above. The architecture was similar to that of the Bansi Gopalji temple. The atmosphere was secluded, as in a monastery. So it just so happens today, the devotees who stay, the bhaktas who stay at Govinda Nivas and Dharmatma Prabhu, they wanted to see the place of pastime of Kuvalayapida. And there at the Rangeshwar temple, it's 10 seconds away from the Gaudiya Mat, the Keshav Gaudiya Mat. So first we went to the Keshav Gaudiya Mat to take the blessings of Sri Sri Radha Vinod Bihari Ji and Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who Srila Prabhupada personally installed there. When he was in Jhansi, he got the murti in Bengal, of course, because it's a Nim, Mahaprabhu. One arm is up, one arm is down. And can you put the camera onto the screen? Last year, unfortunately, when Narayan Maharaj entered Samadhi, of course there's always problems of succession whenever the Acharya leaves. And there was a slight breaking up there, and there were decisions being made that were in agreement to one side but not in agreement to the other side. So one of those decisions that was made was that the temple, the Keshav Gaudiya Mat, it was a very beautiful temple with 9 shikars. This is the way the Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati designed the temples. You'll see all the Gaudiya Mat temples have these beautiful shikars on top. But this temple, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati had never visited. It was established after he left by Keshav Maharaj. And what happened was there was a dharmshala there on the main road of Mathura, just near Holy Gate at Tilak Dwar. You can just walk there very easily. And that dharmshala was donated to Keshav Maharaj. It was a very old dharmshala. And they built the temple on top of the dharmshala. So the dharmshala, being very old as the foundation, was beginning to fall apart. And therefore, one of the factions, after Narayan Maharaj left, was they decided that they would demolish the temple and raise the funds to build a new temple. And the other faction didn't agree with it, so they split up. So, and many of the devotees were very upset, but they couldn't understand. Sometimes, just like we have in our Gurukula, many of us we were very upset. But when you call the engineers in and you call the professionals in and you hear that, do you want to take the risk of the ceiling falling on the devotee's head and then the devotee's dying? If the engineers say that something is dangerous, do you want to take the risk to not break the building down, and then it's your fault if the devotees die? So therefore, sometimes we have to listen to the professionals, although it breaks our heart. It's like losing a friend when you see a building that you've been serving in for so many years being broken down. So they broke down the building, and when we arrived there today, there was a disciple of, because they have their parampara, after Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, they had Vaman Maharaj. After Vaman Maharaj, there was Narayan Maharaj. And now, after Narayan Maharaj, there's several of his disciples. So one of his disciples, Madhav Maharaj, one of his disciples was overlooking the construction. So I asked him, where's Radha Vinod Bihari? Where's Mahaprabhu? Because the whole place was just a big construction site. We'll see the sign. So he very kindly showed us, just in a little gully on the side, they had moved the whole altar there. You can go to the first one. Yes. So this is Radha Vinod Bihari. And to the right, or to Radharani's left, is a murti of Bhakti Pragya Keshav Maharaj, who Prabhupada took sannyas from. And then they have a very small deity there of Mahaprabhu. So I asked the devotee, well, where's Mahaprabhu that Prabhupada gave? Because they all knew that the relationship between Prabhupada and Keshav Maharaj. So then, you can go on now. Aage ja. Next. Yes. So they were in the process of painting Mahaprabhu. And therefore, they had taken him off the altar and he was on the side. You see, they made a very nice wooden lotus around his base, because it's a wooden base. It had to be protected. So the devotee who paints our deities here, Krishna Balaram, Radhe Shyam, Gaur-Nitai, he happened to come today also. And he said, see this base? We're going to make the same type of base for all of our deities here, because you'll see our deities, when they were installed, Jamuna was deciding, it's not that you just put deities on the altar and that's the end of it. No, you have to decide, just like Balaram's hand. So he can't have the hand right on Krishna, because Krishna has to have his shirt, he has to have his chadar. You have to be able to get the cloth there. So the deities had to be raised and lowered, and which direction they were going to face each other or face the devotees, how the gopis were going to be, because in some temples the gopis are looking out. And in our temple, the gopis are looking at Radhashyam Sundar. So all that had to be decided, and the altar they had to be sunk into the altar, some of them, and some of them had to be raised. So that all was decided before the temple was built, before the deities were installed, and then they were cemented onto the altar, higher or lower, however it had to be. And then no base was made around them to protect the base, the marble that they were carved from, because they all started out as just a block of marble. So that block is still there at the base. And then the kalakars in Jaipur, they're so expert, they can see by their different dimensions, they have different shastras, exactly how the deity is formed out of the stone. So now we're going to have like that a base also, like Mahaprabhu has. And this is the deity that Srila Prabhupada had carved. Sankirtan and benediction, both. Now it's very interesting because the devotees who were present at the time in the Keshav Gaudiya Math, they remember this day very well when Prabhupada took sannyas. And they were reminiscing how this taking of sannyas affected Srila Prabhupada with his momentum to go and preach. They said that Prabhupada, when he came back from America, because he was constantly corresponding with them, he needed mridangas sent, he needed his books sent, he needed kartals sent, and that he would send them money and they would ship all the things to America for Prabhupada. So he explained to them when he came back from America that at first Prabhupada, just as he was doing here, he was lecturing in America. he would go to many different places, like he went to Butler, Pennsylvania, then he went to New York City, giving lectures at the Ananda Ashram. But people weren't taking interest. Then he decided to follow Mahaprabhu's program. And he went to a park, and he sat down under a tree, and he started to do kirtan. And he said when he started to do kirtan, that is when he started to have success in his preaching. And it was the kirtans that attracted the American devotees to become Krishna conscious. Then later he added the lectures. He would have three evenings a week and every morning. But it was actually the kirtan, Mahaprabhu's program, that in every town and village my name will be heard, this Sankirtan, that made Krishna consciousness successful all over the world. So you can, some more pictures. We have some close-ups. Yes. So now Mahaprabhu is being painted. They've taken care of him very nicely all of these years. More? These are his lotus feet. These are the bases that will be made. Now this is, you see the sign here, it says Punar Nirman. So reconstruction. And they're making a very big temple now with living quarters for the devotees. They're making a museum of Narayan Maharaj's life and how he and Srila Prabhupada were very close friends and how he assisted Srila Prabhupada up until the very last days. Prabhupada especially asked Narayan Maharaj to place him in samadhi. No one else was asked to do that. And he asked the devotees to cooperate with him to help, that he could help them. So they had a very close relationship. And then the devotees also spoke about some misunderstandings that occurred that none of us were aware of, because none of us were present at the time. I'll just mention them now because these things they happen amongst family members. For instance, Srila Prabhupada, when he was traveling all over for starting Krishna consciousness, he would write to the Keshav Gaudiya Math, the devotees, asking for the mridangas, his books, and things like that. And they were writing back to him. At that time, Keshav Maharaj had fallen terminally ill. And they were writing back to him that we can't take care of your things now. We're taking care of Guru Maharaj. He's just about to leave his body. And then Prabhupada would write again that, please, I'm depending on you, send the things. He wasn't getting their letters. And they were thinking that he was ignoring the fact that their Guru Maharaj was so sick, that why wasn't he saying anything? It was because all the telegrams and all the letters they were sending, he had already gone on to another place and didn't get the letters. And then finally, when Prabhupada did receive word that Keshav Maharaj had left this world, he was devastated. He was in Seattle at the time. And he wrote a beautiful poem in Sanskrit glorifying his sannyas guru. And he wrote a formal letter, and he had all the devotees who were present there in Seattle sign that letter, and that was mailed to the Keshav Gaudiya Math. And then they understood that he hadn't heard from them, he didn't know. And that's how these misunderstandings take place. And then another time, because we know that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he was the one who revived the Navadvip Parikrama, Navadvip Mando Parikrama, that Bhaktivinoda Thakur had established. So Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati not only did it in Navadvip, but then he started the Brajmando Parikrama, following in exactly the footsteps that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had gone on when he came to Mathura. And Krishna Das had taken him to all the 12 forests. And then afterwards, when Raghava Pandit took Narottam Das Thakur and Srinivas on the same route, that same route that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took. So Keshav Maharaj, when Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati left this world, Keshav Maharaj took up that service of continuing the Brajmando Parikrama. And then in Mayapur also they continued the Navadvip Mando Parikrama. So when Prabhupada first got his land in Mayapur to make the Mayapur Chandrodaya Mandir, he invited Keshav Maharaj, by then he had disappeared, but he invited the disciples to please come to the Mayapur Chandrodaya property. Prabhupada only had his kutir then. So as they were coming down the road, the whole party entered into the land. And they were all chanting, thousands of devotees, they were all chanting there at Prabhupada's bhajan kutir, that's still there now. And Prabhupada didn't come out. And they couldn't understand that he invited us, and now he's not coming out to greet us. And there were only like 2 or 3 devotees there. And the devotees didn't know that Prabhupada had invited them. Meanwhile, Prabhupada, he had an emergency call from Bombay. He had left for Bombay. He wasn't there. And the devotees never told, because there was no communication. Sometimes due to lack of communication, these misunderstandings happen, and it hurts the heart. It hurts the feelings of the devotees. So these 2 misunderstandings got carried forward over the years until they were cleared up by Srila Prabhupada. So now we have we're in the middle of the relationship. Finally, Prabhupada has decided, yes, now I will take sannyas from my godbrother. He's my friend. He understands me. He understands the mission that my spiritual master has given, because Tirtha Maharaj wasn't interested. He was discouraging him from going to the West. He had lived here. Abai was a familiar, welcome figure here. He had lived here, written and studied in the library here, edited the Gaudiya Patrika, and donated the deity of Lord Chaitanya, who stood on the altar besides the deities of Radha and Krishna, Shri Shri Radha Binod Bihariji. You can finish showing these and then we'll... So in the original temple, on each side of the altar, on the left side, they had Gopeshwar Mahadev. And then, yes, Gopeshwar Mahadev is here. And then on the right side, they have Purnamasi. So 2 figures are outside decorating, just like we have outside of our temples. We have Advaitacharya one side and devotees, and then we have the Gopas, and then we have the Gopis. So this is how they're decorating the temple, just as they had it originally. Anything more? This is going to be the museum of how the 2 parties work together to spread Krishna consciousness all over the world. More? That's all? Okay, so very soon the temple will be ready, and we'll be able to take darshan again of Mahaprabhu and Radha Vinod Bihari, because Prabhupada, as said here, he was a familiar, he lived there, he helped to edit the Gaudiya Patrika, and donated the deity who stood on the altar beside the deities of Radha and Krishna, Shri Shri Radha Binod Bihariji. But his visit during September of 1959 was not an ordinary one. He entered the mutt dressed in white, Abai Babu, but he would soon be leaving dressed in saffron, a Swami. Now, on this side, because Prabhupada, now we have at the Radha Damodar temple, the Goswami who's in charge of the Seva Puja there. What's the young man's name? No, Panchu's son. he was a student in our Gurukula, Panchu's son. And so he loves devotees, he loves ISKCON, he grew up here. And then, unexpectedly, his father died. His father's name was Panchu Goswami. So then the son took over. Now Panchu, when he was a little boy, that was when Prabhupada moved into the Radha Damodar temple. And his father was Gaurchand Goswami. So Srila Prabhupada, when he was living at the Bansi Gopal temple, he would go regularly for darshan at the Sapta Deva mandirs. And especially, he would take the most inspiration from the Radha Damodar temple, because Prabhupada called the Radha Damodar temple the hub of the spiritual universe, because that was where the 6 Goswamis would meet every day to have their Srimad Bhagavatam classes. And they have a very extensive library there of the Goswamis' literatures. Over 2,000 books are there. And some of them are over 400 years old, some of the books, dated from the times of the Goswamis. And Rupa Goswami's Samadhi, Bhajan Kutir is there, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's Pushpa Samadhi is there, Jiva Goswami's Samadhi is there, Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami's Samadhi is there, Bhugarbha Goswami's, so many deities were brought there. As the Goswamis sold off the different temples and different land parcels, the deities were brought to the Radha Damodar temple, and that's why there's so many deities on the altar there, of Vishwanath Chakravarti and so many different great acharyas. Their deities were brought to the Radha Damodar temple. So Prabhupada, with so much spiritual essence there, Prabhupada especially loved the Radha Damodar temple. And Gaurchand Goswami could understand that. So he came to Prabhupada and invited him, why don't you come and live here? We have 2 rooms empty. Now the rooms probably hadn't been repaired since the time of the 6 Goswamis. They were falling apart completely. But Prabhupada saw the opportunity, and he collected 500 rupees, which was a huge amount of money at that time. And he got the 2 rooms into living condition. One he used as his living room, where he had a very simple charpai, picture of his Guru Maharaj, and he would just sit and do his writing there. And the other side was a kitchen. And he would sit where he sat to take his prasadam. He would look right out the window and see the Samadhi and Bhajan Kutir of Rupa Goswami. So he had great inspiration. Internally, the Goswamis were directing Prabhupada how he should carry on this movement. So he would come, when he moved to the Radha Damodar temple, he was still in Grihastha Vesh. He was still wearing white cloth. He was still Abhay Babu. And because there were other godbrothers in the area, such as Bhakti Saranga Goswami, who was just at Imli Tala, just down the road, his disciples were there. And Prabhupada's sister had taken Brahman Diksha from Bhakti Saranga Goswami, and Prabhupada's wife had also taken Diksha from Bhakti Saranga Goswami. So there was a relationship. And Pishima, she had many friends there. And she had her sons, because her sons were well placed as advocates and they had good business, they donated to the construction of the Imli Tala temple. So her friends were there, her god sisters were there, and one of them was named Prabhavati. Prabhavati, she knew Prabhupada from when he lived in Calcutta. She was a little girl, and her grandfather would take her to the Chaitanya Mat. at Bagh Bazar. And she would see Abai Babu there. And her grandfather would point out, because he was very well respected, even though he was a grihasta. And then she got married, and just after her marriage, just 7 years later, no children, her husband unexpectedly died. And she was left as a widow. And her Guru Maharaj told her, come to live in Vrindavan and serve Radha Gopinath at the Imlitala temple. So from the age of 25, she had been living here in Vrindavan. So when Prabhupada moved to the Radha Damodar temple, since he knew her since she was a little girl, he asked her, you come sometimes, you can cook. And because we used to cook at Radha Damodar, it was very austere. No running water, no electricity. There's a well that the Goswamis used to use. We used to have to draw the water from the well. We would cook with gobar kanda. And Prabhupada had his cooker there. So Prabhupada, he didn't, so he would tell her, you do the cooking, because Prabhupada wanted to write his books. So she would make shukta every day. She would make shukta out of green papaya, eggplant, potato, and kachakela. And Prabhupada would have nothing to do with her personally, but just to give him more time, she would come and do all the kitchen work. And Prabhupada had a little Giriraj at that time, Govardhan Shila, that he kept in a box. He would offer the boga to Giriraj, and then he would take the prasadam. And then one day, he comes back as a sannyasi. And he didn't tell anyone that he was taking sannyas. It happened so fast. Because what happened was, when Keshav Maharaj came back from Mayapur, he sat down with Prabhupada, with Narayan Maharaj, with a few other devotees, and he said, now is the time to take sannyas. So the next day was the day that Vishwarup accepted sannyas. It was a very auspicious day, September 17th, 1959. So we'll do it tomorrow. It's a very auspicious day. So Abai Prabhupada, he didn't know, he wasn't prepared. So Narayan Maharaj says, don't worry, I'll get everything ready. So overnight, he got the dandas. There are 3 dandas, and then 1 little danda. The 3 dandas are the body, mind, and the words. Yes. And then the 4th one, that's the soul, the atma. So he wrapped up the danda, and Prabhupada's danda we have here, you can see. It should be the same height as the sannyasi. And he made the cloth. There's the bahir vesh, that's the dhoti. There's the uttariya, that's the top cloth. And then 2 kopan. He got all that ready for Prabhupada. And then they get new neck beads at the time of the 3rd Diksha. And they also receive the sannyas mantra. So all of that, Narayan Maharaj did for him overnight. So the next morning, without telling anyone in Vrindavan what was going to happen, Prabhupada accepted sannyas. Abai had been living as a renunciant for 9 years. There was no need for him to observe a ceremony or to proclaim himself a sadhu by changing to saffron dress. But it was the parampara system that a man take Tridandi sannyas at the end of his life. He was aware of the cheating sannyasis. Even in Vrindavan, he had seen so-called sadhus who did not preach, but simply spent their days hunting for chapatis. So not much has changed here in Vrindavan since then. Some swamis of Vrindavan even indulged illicitly in what they had supposedly come here to reject, sex life. Such persons were making a mockery of sannyas. And there were the caste Goswamis also, who lived like ordinary householders, running temples as a business to support their families and accepting honor and donations from the public on the false basis of birth. So this is a carryover, because the 6 Goswamis, they were Goswamis. They didn't have any children. Of Rupa Goswami and Anupam, there was only one son, and that was Jiva, and he was a sannyasi. So where were the children? There were no children. So the sannyasis had disciples, and those disciples became these caste Goswamis because they would do the worship in the temples. But nobody is directly related from any of the sannyasis because they had no children. Gopal Bhatta, he had no children. Raghunath Bhatta, he had no children. The Rupa Goswami, Sanatana Goswami, Jiva Goswami, Raghunath Das Goswami, we all know that he had no children. He ran away from his family. So all of these caste Goswamis, they're coming down in a line of not disciplic succession. Please ask the Matajis not to speak back there. Not disciplic succession. It's by birth. And they were claiming rights to the temples by birth. Someone had to do the puja, that's correct. But they were using that, accepting honor and donations from the public on the false basis of their birth, and using that money to support their families. Abai knew of these abuses of sannyas, but he also knew the real purpose of sannyas. Sannyas was for preaching. So Srila Prabhupada, when he came back that day dressed in red cloth, and Prabhavati saw him, and all the devotees of the Radha Damodar saw him, from that day, he would not speak to any women. He didn't allow Prabhavati to come anymore and cook. He just completely shut down any... Prabhupada, he came from a Grihastha background. He didn't need to cheat. He gave up everything to become a genuine sannyasi. So he wouldn't let anyone serve him anymore after that. He did everything by himself, or sometimes Narayan Maharaj would come to visit him. Of course, Narayan Maharaj was very busy with the Gaudiya Patrika magazine, because now Prabhupada had to concentrate full time on writing books so that he could go to the West. So he couldn't help with the editing anymore. And Prabhupada wouldn't go to stay there so much anymore. He had a room. They kept the room for Prabhupada for 5 years after he took sannyas, so that whenever he wanted to, he could come there and just write. And then Narayan Maharaj would sometimes come to visit Prabhupada. And Prabhupada lived so austerely. All he had was a torn quilt. And we know how cold it gets here in Vrindavan. So when Narayan Maharaj saw that Prabhupada was living with just a torn quilt, he gave him his own chadar for his bed. So they would still meet from time to time, but they were both very busy in their writing work. On the morning of September 17th, 1959, in the 50 by 25 foot deity room on the second floor of the Keshavji Mat, a group of devotees sat before the deities of Radha and Krishna and Lord Chaitanya. Now also, because it was done so quickly, they couldn't call anyone to invite them. So mostly it was the devotees, the brahmacharis who stayed at the Mat, and some of the sannyasi godbrothers who lived nearby. And especially Prabhupada's dear, dear godbrother, Krishnadas Babaji, he came from Vrindavan. The deities were colorfully dressed in royal clothing and silver crowns. Radharani's right hand faced palm forward in benediction for the worshipper. At her side, her left hand held a flower for Krishna. Now you'll see several deities like in Bombay, right hand benediction and left hand, Radha Rasa Bihari, she's holding a lotus, and her hand is connected to her body. That's why you won't see that hand, but you will see the benedicting hand. But when Srila Prabhupada installed Radhashyam Sundar here, he instructed Jamuna, and he showed her personally that here Radharani is only dancing. So it was in the dancing mudra that we have Radharani here. Now they put baskets and bouquets and garlands, but it wasn't like that when the temple first opened. Krishna's playing his flute, Radharani's dancing. Very simple. And Prabhupada showed Jamuna, this is how Radharani should be. Krishna stood like a dancer, placing his right leg in a casual tiptoe pose before his left. Can show Radha Vinod Bihari. Playing his long silver flute, which he held gracefully to his red lips. His long black hair reached down past his shoulders, and the garland of marigolds around his neck reached down to his knees. Now, previously, again, misunderstandings occurred. After Srila Prabhupada disappeared, there were misunderstandings, but we would go regularly to take darshan. It was just one happy family before. There was no misunderstandings at all. But then, we won't talk about the misunderstandings, but there were misunderstandings, so now the devotees, Prabhupada never encouraged us to go to the Gaudiya Maths, but because he installed the deity there and because Prabhupada took sannyas there, sometimes on the day that Prabhupada took sannyas, the devotees would go there and glorify Prabhupada and glorify Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati at that very place. But now the ISKCON devotees don't go there anymore. Now there's no temple there either, so. On his right stood the deity of Lord Chaitanya, his right arm raised, left arm at his side, his body straight, feet together. He was a soft golden color, and he had large eyes, a well-formed red mouth, and straight black hair down to his shoulders. One level below the deities were pictures of the spiritual masters in disciplic succession. Now, for some reason, in our temples, we do from left to right. In the Gaudiya Math temple here, they do from right to left. They have Jagannath Das Babaji first, then Bhaktivinoda Thakur, then Gorkishore Das Babaji, then Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, then Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj. Now, the way we understood it is that the way we do our puja is we don't directly approach the Supreme Lord with our offerings. We offer everything to our spiritual master who, of course, for us it's Srila Prabhupada. We offer everything to Srila Prabhupada. Prabhupada offers it to the disciplic succession and then offered to Krishna that way. But in Pancharatrika and other systems, they offer first to Krishna and then it comes through the disciplic succession to the Guru. But that's not the way Prabhupada taught us to do our Seva Puja. He taught us, because we're so unqualified, we're offering to him, and he's taking care of the rest of how it gets to Krishna, because we're not qualified to approach Krishna directly. So their disciplic succession is in the opposite direction that we have in our temples. There's some slight differences. For instance, they chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. They chant Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, and then Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, and then Hare Ram, Ram Ram. So things are slightly different, and we don't look at the differences. We look at the similarities of how everyone is trying to serve the mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu according to the instructions given by their particular Guru Maharaj. So that's how Prabhupada taught us how to chant the Maha Mantra, the two parts of the mantra chanted together, and that's how we chanted in ISKCON. Although, but we're not interested in arguing. We just do what Prabhupada told us to do, and holding on to the end of his dhoti, He's going to take us back to Godhead, nobody else. Abai sat on a mat of kusha grass beside 90-year-old Sanatan, also to receive sannyas that day. Sitting opposite the two candidates, Narayan Maharaj, Keshav Maharaj's disciple, prepared to conduct the ceremony of mantras and offerings of grains and ghee into the fire. So Narayan Maharaj, because he had already taken sannyas 7 years earlier, he knew the whole procedure of just as we have our ceremonies here in the temple. He knew how to carry out the Agnihotra. So he chanted all the mantras while Keshav Maharaj was presiding on an elevated seat. Akinchana Krishnadas Babaji, Abai's godbrother, known for sweet singing, played mridanga and sang Vaishnav bhajans. Well, that's not true. He didn't sing Vaishnav bhajans because Prabhupada only wanted Krishnadas Babaji to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. And from 8 o'clock in the morning until 3 o'clock in the afternoon, non-stop. And while the mantras were being chanted during the ceremony, they were saying, not so loud, not so loud. And secretly Prabhupada was saying, louder, louder. So Prabhupada only wanted the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. There were no other bhajans being sung during the ceremony. Sitting on a raised asan, His Holiness Keshav Maharaj presided. Since there had been no notices or invitations, only the mutt's few residents attended. Narayan Maharaj chanted the required mantras and then sat back silently while Keshav Maharaj lectured. Then, to everyone's surprise, Keshav Maharaj asked Abai to speak because they were on the same, they fully understood each other. So, Abai had not expected this. As he looked around at the gathering of devotees, he understood that the common language was Hindi. Well, actually, the common language was Bengali. They were all Gaudiya Vaishnavas. But because they were in Mathura, for instance, their Gaudiya Patrika is printed in Hindi, printed in Bengali, both. Only Keshav Maharaj and a few others spoke English. Yet he knew he must speak in English. So this lecture that Prabhupada spoke in English was remembered by Narayan Maharaj, and Narayan Maharaj also had it printed because he knew English, enough English. He printed it in the Gaudiya Patrika. And Prabhupada was explaining the mission given to him by his spiritual master. And now that he was accepting sannyas, he was going to dedicate himself to writing books in English to prepare for carrying out the order of his spiritual master's instructions to preach in the Western countries. So before this, we know that Prabhupada was only printing the Back to Godhead magazine in English. But after taking sannyas, Prabhupada, and we'll read in the next chapter, how Prabhupada was inspired at this time to now start preparing books so that when he went to the West, he wouldn't be empty-handed. After Abai's speech, each initiate received his sannyas danda, the traditional head-high staff made of 4 bamboo rods bound together and completely enwrapped in saffron cloth. Now you'll see sometimes, because I think it's the first 10 years you're supposed to carry your danda with you. So when Prabhupada went to America, he didn't carry his danda with him. He kept it in his rooms at the Radha Damodar temple. But sometimes Prabhupada wanted to take official photographs to be put in his books. So I remember one time, it was 1972, because in New York, we used to have the ISKCON press before BBT was created. And they wanted to have official photographs of Srila Prabhupada. So they bought this beautiful purple crushed velvet, and in the Henry Street Temple there was a garden in the back. And they set up the velvet so to look like a background. Yes, right here. This is the picture. You can all see the picture. So it says here that the danda is supposed to be head high. But they wanted Prabhupada to have a danda in the picture, and he didn't have his danda. So he borrowed Satsvarup Maharaj's danda. And that's why it's about 1 foot taller than Prabhupada. Right, the picture's right here. I remember I was right there watching the whole thing happen. So Srila Prabhupada was very forgiving. So, because the devotees were just trying to please Srila Prabhupada. So they put two things together and they had to find a danda. They got the danda. So that became the official photo of Prabhupada with his danda. Okay. All right. Okay. What time is it? Oh, sorry, it's 7 o'clock. We're right in the middle of the ceremony. We'll have to hear more next week. We didn't get to finish the chapter. Please forgive me. Hare Krishna. Jai.